So I think we can probably start. I think people are going to join in. So I know it's timing wise, it's pretty late in the US. It's pretty early in Jakarta. It's Saturday. I'm sure people have stuff to do. So firstly, I want to thank everyone for joining in. I really appreciate you saving the time to join us to talk about this. So again, I'll introduce myself. My name is Kennedy Ashinze. I'm the founder of Globetrotter Lab. We're a creative media agency, started from Chicago, but we're based here in Jakarta, right? And I'm going to introduce my folks on the panel. Great folks that have been so kind and generous enough to spend some of their time with us today. So I'll start with Arief Williams. Arief Williams is from Chicago. Eric, you can raise your hand up so in case they don't know. There you go. Really good, amazing friend of mine. He's been to Indonesia. He spoke at my wedding, a mentor, all of that. So I'm not going to read his whole bio for you, but we have it on our Instagrams and all that. But amazing friend. Curtis, I just found out about not too long ago, the former senior manager at America in Jakarta. So he left in February, in March during the COVID stuff, but he plans on coming back, I believe, in August. So it's pretty crazy. There are not a lot of Black people in Jakarta, but we never actually met. So that was looking forward to having you back in Jakarta. And then of course, Arief is moderating this. He's the country director for change.org. He also co-founded TEDx Jakarta. And, one of the first people that reached out when this whole stuff was going on and just, offered to help in any way, shape or form. I told him I was working on something, so I definitely needed that support there. So I'm very grateful for that. Even with translate, he's going to be not only asking questions, but also translating sometimes. And then Hadi, is Hadi in there somewhere? Hadi is with Manuel. If you're in Jakarta, you're very familiar. He owns New Media Folder. He's a media peer of mine, and I thought I'd reach out and make it inclusive. I thought this is not a lecture, right? This is a lot of us still don't even have the full answers, with what's going on here. So that's why, I called it an open conversation, So obviously, we have a different lens of how we see what's going on and how it affects us. Even Eric, Curtis, even Barbara right now, they're in the US, they're there in real time. So they can actually, I'm actually watching like all the other Indonesians from Indonesia here. I get to call them and talk to them, but they're on the ground. So there's that lens that they get to speak from. So then we've got Michael. I believe Michael is in here as well as a musician, a Papuan musician. There's a little bit of that, correlation there a little bit with the Papuan struggle here in Indonesia. So he's going to give some insights, and he joined us a few days ago. So thanks a lot for doing that. I appreciate that. And am I missing anyone? Let's see. I think I got everybody in there, right? And again, the reason why we're here is to have this open conversation about, I'm sure we've all seen it on our screens, the Black Lives Matter protests. And there's something different about this one. It looks like the world is paying attention. It was almost like the camel broke or something. Like it's, and I think it's, I was talking to Arief even yesterday, and we were just discussing how this one feels different. It feels like there was a combination of things. I mean, 2020 has been such a year, right? I think this time around we were sitting at home, and we kind of just watched. It was like a buildup, I don't know if you're in the US. If you're not in the US, there was kind of a buildup with this thing in relation to the Black Lives Matter protests. First there was the Ahmaud Arbery case, and then there was the Breonna Taylor. There's the George Floyd. So there was just buildup, and we're all like at home watching these things. Normally sometimes you get distracted, when you're going by your 9 to 5, or you might see a snippet of it on TV. But this time I think we're all kind of just like watching, and it just kind of hit a little bit different this time, And the truth with these things is that, a lot of times these cases, we thank God for technology. A lot of times these things do not, they don't get convicted unless there's a video evidence, because I remember Ahmaud Arbery, the case happened since February, like right before Corona. So it was kind of this single mom, you know, just pleading for justice. There was no video. The case was almost kind of done until the video evidence came out. So these things have been incredibly triggering for a lot of Black folks all over the world. You know, we've always kind of known these things happen. I think this time the world got to see it, and it hit a nerve somehow. Like obviously, there's all over the world, like countries are participating and protesting. So there's a lot to uncover. We're not going to uncover everything here, but at least we're going to share, have dialogues, and just exchange information and see how we can move forward. And by all means, we're going to take questions later down. Okay. So thanks again and welcome everyone.
Thanks a lot, Kennedy. Hi, everyone. I'm Arief. I'll be moderating today, and I'm super excited. There's a lot to cover. There's a lot to learn. We have limited time. Thank you so much to Globetrotter and Kennedy for inviting me into this process. The objective here today is to educate, I suppose, a lot of the audience is Indonesian. So to educate kind of like Indonesians on what's really happening out there, why it's happening, what's the way forward. But I also do acknowledge there are people from around the world, as it is becoming more and more of a global movement. Just a few things on questions. We're going to do this quite free flowing. So please type in your questions on the chat. And whenever I see them, I'll try to incorporate it to my questions. We have tons of questions from you guys when you registered, so we'll try to cover most of that, if not all of that. Yeah, before we start, yesterday morning, I got a distressing message from Muriel. Muriel, if you don't know, is Kennedy's wife here in Jakarta, who's waving right now, that something had happened to Kennedy. And I couldn't believe it because the timing of this was just almost unbelievable. So I would like to invite Kennedy actually to start by sharing your personal experience, Kennedy, of what happened just 2 nights ago. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Before I continue, I want to acknowledge Barbara. Barbara Allen is back in the frame. Thanks for making it. We're having some technical issues there. Okay, guys, so the timing was crazy, I got to admit. You know, I've been in Jakarta now for almost 7 years, right? Most of my friends know I moved here 2013 after I got married. And for the most part, you know, it's been amazing. You know, with me being, I've had a lot of friends come visit. I feel like I'm an ambassador for Indonesia. Anytime I leave the country, you know, I'm always speaking highly about it and dispelling myths and all that. And it's been, I'm aware of like things that happen with maybe with Africans here and like the stereotypes with drugs and so on and so forth. But, you know, I don't even keep it at bay. I'm just aware, you know, but it doesn't really surface in South Jakarta, right? There's just not a lot of Black people in South Jakarta, to be honest. And so I'll keep this short, but this has kind of affected how I'm going to approach this talk, honestly. But 2 nights ago, I was jogging, you know, everyone's been finding ways to do their quarantine thing, right? So we've just had this schedule of walking every day, like, you know, walking 10 steps a day. So it's either we walk in the morning or work at night or jog or so on. So 2 nights ago, I was doing my normal walk, like around 8 o'clock at night in my neighborhood, a route that I normally go by. And on my way back, you know, I'm all sweaty, have my water bottle. I had AirPods on, I'm listening to some news or something and just kind of jogging back. And you got to realize, like with walking, Jakarta is really not a walking city as such, you know, but luckily Kemang Raya, there's just this new path there. So it's pretty decent, right? But again, when you're walking on the street with the corona case, you're not trying to chat with anyone, right? You have your mask on, you're not trying to stay too close to people like that. And I remember some guy, I'm kind of at the last leg of my thing, and some guy taps me in the back, which is very weird. No one talks to you. In Jakarta, that's the beauty. You can just kind of mind your own business. And, so this guy taps me, I have my headphones on and I'm thinking he's trying to ask me for directions. So I'm like, oh no, I don't know what I couldn't understand what he was saying. So I just kept on walking. I just noticed from the side that he kept on following me. And it was like 1, 2, and then there was 3 guys and they kept on like, so I was like, what's going on? This is like 8:30, 9, close to 9 o'clock. And I take my AirPods off. I was like, can I help you? Like what's happening? Like, what is this? And then they're asking me like, where are you from? Where are you from? Where's your, can I see your immigration papers? You got to realize this has never happened in Jakarta, at least for me, right? Never. So this is like, I'm thinking like, first of all, they're not identifying themselves. They're not wearing they're not in uniform or anything. I'm thinking like, are these robbers? Like what's going, they just literally, and I'm like, what do you mean where are my papers? Like, who are you? Like, what is this about? And we kind of make our way to one area and then they had like a boss there, like a bigger guy. There was a car running. And I was like, first of all, I'm not showing you anything. I'm jogging. I live here. I do this jog every day. And do people jog around holding with their passports in their pockets, And I was like, first of all, this never happened. So this is crazy. Like, I don't even know who you guys are. You have to show me some ID. Then the boss guy shows his ID. And I was telling him, well, I don't have my passport on me, and I'm not. And then he was like, well, that means you're gonna have to go in the car with us. And at that point, I was like, this can go 2 ways, because I was definitely, that would have been the worst thing that happened to me if I actually went into that car. At this time I was like 50-50, like, am I going to start swinging? Because it had that look, like, I was kind of surrounded by these guys. I saw the car parked, and normally that's how that works, right? They tell you to get in the car, and then you don't get in the car and they make you get in the car, So I was just like, I made a scene. It was pretty crazy. I just felt like hunted down on the street. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I thought it was really shocking, and I was furious. I made a scene there, and I was like, I'm not getting in no car. If you want to see my ID, you can walk with me to my house. So literally, they're like following me, like some escort, like I was some kind of. It was incredibly embarrassing, and I was furious. It never happened in my 7 years here, and so we walked to the house. Take that nice little long walk to my house, coming through my building security. I'm calling Muriel to bring my paperwork down. So, but it was just incredibly humiliating the way it was all done. I'm still kind of trying to put it behind me so I can focus on the talk. But that was like incredibly troubling. And I think there is this comfort level with what they do with Africans here sometimes. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure sometimes there are people that don't have their papers, or their papers are expired or whatnot. But to me, I just thought it was incredibly hostile. Like, the approach was incredibly hostile, and would be very, not only intimidating, but very, just incredibly brash to a foreigner. I just thought their priorities were incredibly wrong. Like, everyone is fighting Corona right now. You know what I mean? They're barely foreigners in Jakarta, to be honest. And I just thought it was pretty unusual, and I just thought I'd share that with the room. They took my passport and took photos, which I feel weird about, because it was like this random guys. Even the documents they showed me were not like official documents. It was just this weird. One of the IDs was expired, but someone now has my passport and kitab document on their phone, So it was just, it was pretty troubling, and I just thought I'd share that with the group. But hopefully we move on and talk about other issues in Jakarta. So yeah, that's my story.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Kennedy. Yeah, the timing of that was so weird. We were, like, you were planning this event, not like 2 days after, but then that happened. I can't imagine how you feel. It's just a blatant practice of racism from law enforcement. It's everywhere, right? This is why it's becoming a global issue. Before we veer into the kind of like global stuff, I'd like to maybe ask Curtis. I think Kennedy saw you gave a talk about the history of Black movement that I'm sure a lot of people here would be enlightened to hear. Yeah.
No, I appreciate it. And Kennedy, thank you for sharing your story. And your story is definitely not a unique one. It is one that if you are a person of color, you've experienced, whether it be in the United States, whether it be in Indonesia, or you know people firsthand who have experienced those things. And so when he's telling me this story, I'm not at all surprised. And what I guess I can bring to the table is just historical context in the United States of why we are where we are and why African Americans are uttering the phrase and shouting the phrase, "I can't breathe." So I want to take us back to the year 1619. In 1619, the first slave arrived on what would ultimately become the United States. 157 years later, the United States signed and ratified the Declaration of Independence. So for the first 157 years that the country was being created, it was being created by essentially free labor. Africans were captured like animals in Africa and taken through the Middle Passage in boats and stacked on top of each other in horrific conditions to get across the Atlantic Ocean and land in the Caribbean and land in the South for labor purposes. And even in 1776, even when the Constitution was signed, Africans or slaves were not deemed to be citizens. They were not treated as people. They were more closely treated as animals. So you fast forward to 1862, and that's 243 years after the first slave landed in what would be the United States. And that's when Abraham Lincoln, our 16th president, signed the Emancipation Proclamation, which ultimately freed slaves. Last week, we celebrated something called Juneteenth in the United States. It's January 19th, 1865. This is 3 years after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. In 1865, slaves are actually released. So for 3 years after it was illegal to own a slave, slaves were actually notified of their release. So another 3 years. So there's 250 total years of free labor. And when you're looking at a democracy and what makes a citizen of a democracy, your citizenship comes with your eligibility to vote. Now, again, African Americans had been in the country for 250 years and they just won their freedom. The ability to vote had not even come into play. So we fast forward to 1920. Okay, so this is close to 60 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. And this is when white women are actually guaranteed the right to vote in the United States. So before, and anybody, a person of color, is guaranteed the right to vote, white women received the right to vote in 1920. In 1965, only 55 years ago, my father, who just turned 70 this year, was 15 years old in 1965. So when we say things happened so long ago, it's not that long ago. It's my father's generation. 346 years after the first slave landed, like I said, only 55 years ago, African Americans were guaranteed the right to vote. Black people have been hunted and killed from the beginning of our existence. Our very existence sometimes could be considered illegal. It was illegal for slaves to marry each other. It was definitely illegal for them to marry people who were not slaves. It was illegal at certain times and certain places to learn how to read. And it was illegal to teach slaves how to read. When the police department didn't handle things in what the community felt was a proper fashion when it came to slaves, so entered the Ku Klux Klan, as well as just ordinary citizens who felt like they were entitled to take the law into their own hands and not feel any repercussions. A perfect example of this is in 1955, when a 14-year-old from Chicago named Emmett Till was lynched in, I want to say, Mississippi, because he was falsely accused of offending a white woman. The two white men who were accused of the crime were found not guilty, and once they were tried, they openly admitted to committing the crime, as they knew they would not be prosecuted again. For those who don't know what lynching is, that is where you hang a noose from a tree and you put it around somebody's neck and let them hang. This is a 14-year-old boy in 1955. He could not breathe. Fast forward to 2014, I want to say, and you have Trayvon Martin, who was walking home to his father's house in Florida when a gunman, George Zimmerman, who was just a citizen, pulled a gun on him and asked him about his papers and asked him what he was doing in the neighborhood. And when George Zimmerman did relinquish any papers, or excuse me, Trayvon Martin did not relinquish any papers and did not show him and fought for and defended self, George Zimmerman shot and killed him, a 17-year-old boy. And he was found not guilty. The issue at hand with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor is they were both unarmed and killed by police officers. Statistically, unarmed African Americans are 5 times more likely to be killed by police officers than white Americans. Conversely, when you look at the likelihood of imprisonment, so if you were born in the United States in the year 2001, if you are a white man, a Latino man, or a Black man, this is the chances that you would go to prison. So 1 out of every 17 white men would go to prison. 1 out of 6 Latino men would go to prison. And for African American men, 1 out of every 3, just 3 Black men are guaranteed to go to prison. And so when we talk about these disparities, and we talk about just, again, being able to live and exist and be comfortable in ourselves, it is extremely stifling in the United States to do so. One of the things I'd like to show just real quick is this little makeshift graph. And pardon me because I did it with my hands, but this is the timeline from 1619 to 2000. And this is the history of the United States. The economic viability of African Americans is here. The economic viability of white Americans is here. And this is economic opportunity. And the reason being is because this gap is healthcare, this gap is the judicial system, this gap is the access to the vote, this gap is like health disparities and access to proper food, proper medicine, proper everything. And that is essentially why you see this just, Martin Luther King called a riot the song of the unheard, the voice of the unheard. And that's why you see these things happening, and that's where we are today. So hopefully that gives a little bit of background and context.
Curtis, thanks so much for that. You hear about these stories all the time. And every time you hear it, it's just heartbreaking. And what strikes me is for someone living outside of the US, the rest of the world, is the myth or the legend of the United States of America. What I was brought up with was a legend of a country that is free, a legend of a country that is democratic, that is prosperous, that is modern. And your whole talk just completely puts it upside down. It was that maybe for white Americans, but it was completely the opposite for Black Americans. Thanks so much for that. What I'd like to ask the panel is, especially Americans, is that the stuff that we've seen in the media are really the most obvious and the captured cases of racism. I suspect that racism actually is more subtle than that on a day-to-day basis. Is that true? And like, what, like, I guess my question is, how do you feel as a Black person in America in your daily life? And feel free, Eric,
All right.
Barbara, Curtis, if you want, or Kennedy even.
Yeah, Barbara, would you like to?
Yeah, one thing I wanted to add to what Curtis said, I did a film a few years ago called Colorblind, Rethinking Race. And it was about the systematic institutional racism in health, wealth, education, and the justice system, which is just about covers everything we deal with socially. And to your question, and to add to what he said, racism is so embedded in our culture that even when people have no idea that they're participating in it, it's the way they learn, it's the way they think. There's not a day in my life ever that I have not been confronted with racism on one level or another. It's just that I don't always choose to address it, or I don't make a big deal about it, but people say things to you that they think are complimentary, and it's very racist, like, I don't see you as Black. To me, that's like, are you blind? I mean, I see you as white. Why don't you see me as Black? As if they're paying me a compliment saying, I don't think of you like the others. You're different. So there's these microaggressions, we call microaggressions, these little things that people do that keep nicking at you. And there have been many studies that have shown that these microaggressions and the pressures of systemic institutionalized racism has a very, very big effect on Black health and is literally killing us. Racism is a disease, and it is affecting us in physically, emotionally, spiritually. Even if we choose to ignore it and pretend it's not there, it's always there. It's always that one thing. You're going through life being normal, and then out of nowhere, bam, you're hit with it, and it's like, oh, okay. You're not allowed to just be the person you are. You're the person you are, but you're Black.
Yeah.
So always added into it in some kind of subtle way, and then sometimes in macroaggressions, also. So.
Yeah, and so from your point and Curtis's point, while people might see these things in the media and think, "Ooh, racism is getting worse in the U.S." Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just the same, but it's being highlighted more. Is that accurate?
I think it's like every Black person I know, we're all laughing because all our white friends are calling us saying, "Oh my God, this is terrible. This is going on." This is not new. You just were not paying attention. My neighbor called me over yesterday and said, "I want to talk to you about something, but I don't want you to get mad." And I'm like, "What? I don't understand this Black Lives Matter. Why is Black Lives Matter? Black people kill each other." And I'm like, you know what? White people kill each other more than Black people kill each other. And that's not the point. The point is all lives do matter, but in America, they don't. So we have to say Black Lives Matter because we are being killed. Like he said, the economics are so horrendous that the wealth of a single white woman is like $50,000, and the wealth of Black people is zero. And now it's going into the negatives. So the difference in every aspect of life, I'm lucky, and people on this panel, we're luckier because we were able to have some kind of economic growth and not, have to live as many of our brethren have to live. But it does not, even if you're middle class, upper middle class, it does not stop you from dealing with racism, because on every level, it's always there. You're always reminded, and I work in film and television. I consider myself lucky, successful, but it doesn't stop. People, they have attitudes. I was once editing a piece with a producer, and there was a line that said, this, and the rest of the Arab world. So I had a beautiful shot of a mosque and people, and it was gorgeous. And she said, no, don't use that shot, use this shot. And it was a camel in the desert chewing on some straw and a guy there. And I'm like, I'm not using that shot. I'm using this shot. And she says, well, just put in my shot, and if we get time, we'll put yours in. And I said, no, I'm putting my shot in. I'm not insulting a whole people because of your racism. I'm putting my shot in, and if you get time, you get someone else to put your shot in. I'm not gonna do it. So in addition to me being Black in that environment, I have to almost be a social conscious for innate racism that they don't even understand, because they want to think of the whole Arab world as camel jockeys. They want to think of Black people as ghetto. We have a story about police and how they learned to shoot. Every target was Black. They didn't even see that until I was like, why is every target Black? We can't put this on the air, So it's like a constant fight, and you have to be conscious and you have to be responsible, because when you are in these white spaces as a person of color, if you do not take responsibility and teach them, then there's no reason for you to be there. Then you might as well be a white male. Because if you're gonna act like a white male and let all these things go by, what's your value? So the responsibility also weighs on you. Even though you're in these high profile positions, you still have a whole nother responsibility that my white colleagues never have to deal with.
That's such a great point, Barbara. It seems like a huge blind spot to these people, and it's so obvious for the rest of us sometimes. But maybe all of us have blind spots. Curtis, you wanted to add something?
Yeah. So just following in on that point, right? Like, so one of the things that I've done in this most recent line of protests is I've refused to talk to Americans about it. And so the reason being is I'm like, we know better. We've been doing this for 400 years. I will talk to Indonesians and I will talk to people who are learning about it. That's where I will spend my time and my energy, because that is a people who are interested in growing their mindset. To be, as Barbara said, have to be the sounding board for people is something that goes back to slavery, where white slave owners would talk to their house Negroes and, make them feel better about their conscience. In the movies, Barbara can attest to this, there's the concept of the magical Negro. There is Morgan Freeman always playing God. There is Will Smith as Bagger Vance. There are all these people who are there to serve as a soundboard for the white protagonist. And that in itself is exhausting. And I refuse to play that role in my personal life. But I think Malcolm X once said that, racism is as American as apple pie. And that is accurate because, again, slavery was born into our Constitution. That is the document we hold as Americans to be the most sacred. And when you're at that starting point, you cannot catch up. you just cannot catch up. Over 200, 300, 400 years, you can't catch up. And so when people say, you know, well, why are they doing this? Why is this happening? It's like, well, you have 400 years of legit oppression. And I think when it comes to how racism is viewed today, it's viewed very much on an individual basis. It is not an individual basis as much as it's legit laws that were written and on the books for many, many years that have put us at a disadvantage for all of these things. Again, it was illegal for an entire group of people to learn how to read in the United States. And whether that be for 1 year, 20 years, 50 years, how are you on earth are you to expect that they would be in the same boat as a family who didn't have that obstacle, right? Like that is generational opportunity that's just passed and gone. And so it is a lot of catch up. And as Barbara said, like those of us who have made some economic strides, but we are nowhere near where we would be if we were a white male. Because, you know, a failure on our end is completely different than a failure on their end. There's some such thing as failing up, and there's another thing as failing down. And whether you're a woman, a person of color, you know that experience all too well.
I've seen this debate online. It's very, very interesting. And obviously, the Black community can disagree with this. That it's not like a single voice. Where is it a responsibility from the Black community to educate like white people or the system on this, or is that putting more burden to them? Is it double oppression? I want to hear maybe Eric's thought on this, or stuff that we touched on earlier. Eric?
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for having me on the panel. I was listening to Curtis at MBA, and everything you're saying I completely agree with. I will say in the last 2 weeks, I've gotten more phone calls, emails than ever in my life asking, how can I be a better white person? You know what I mean? So I think this time was a little different. To kind of what Kenny was saying, I think it was several things. I think it was one was the pandemic. Everybody was kind of at home focusing on, you know, just everything that happened in the media. You were forced to kind of to reckon with it. It was Aubrey that got murdered first. It was George Floyd. I think it was two things also that tied into that. I think one was the Amy Cooper situation in New York. I've talked to a lot of my white friends about it, and they always brought that up. And I think, for those of you who don't know, it was a white woman in New York City, in Central Park. She basically weaponized her whiteness by trying to call the police, to threaten to call the police on this Black guy who was telling her to put her dog on a leash. So she was like, you know, I'm going to tell the police there's a Black man threatening me. I think that one was so obvious what she was trying to do that even the white people who didn't believe it before, they couldn't really not believe that one. They saw that. The other thing too, I think the George Floyd case was a little different than the others. With Trayvon Martin, there was no video. With the other cases, even when there was a video, you could always make an excuse. Well, we thought he had a gun, or he was afraid for his life. But I think in the case of George Floyd, it was the methodical murder, you know, and the way he was killed. You know, the knee on the neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and just the way the policeman looked at the camera, he didn't care, you know. So I think you couldn't really argue with that one. You know, all the other ones you could kind of maybe find a way to make an excuse. You know, that one I felt, you know, I think even the white people were like, wow, that one was pretty obvious. I think you kind of put all those things together, and I think they finally like kind of believed us in a way. So I think the pandemic, the Amy Cooper thing, the way he was killed, people were out of work, people were frustrated, people were tired. Now you're moving into the summer, people were just kind of ready to take to the streets. And also I think there was a little bit more strategy behind the protesting than before. You had people who were just out and angry, then you had people who had a strategy to protest to have some laws changed. In Minnesota, defunding the police, police abolitionists, and things actually are changing a little bit. and, you know, putting your money where your mouth is. And then you had Juneteenth kind of right behind that. And everyone wants to give Black people some money, you know, so we'll see how long this lasts. So that's been my take on this. If you look at the, you know, the New York Times best-selling book, I think 12 of the 15 top books are about race. White Fragility, you know, the new Jim Crow. I mean, people are, you know, the 13 documentary. I mean, a lot of white people are interested in finally learning for the first time I've seen it, you know, in my lifetime. So
you're quite hopeful.
I didn't say that.
All right. Let's not go that far.
But that's the saddest part about this whole thing, right? Yeah. That's the saddest part about this whole thing. Like, the burden of proof that we have to display to get people to actually engage in issues that are our own is intense. And so for me, when you're looking at all these things on the, you know, and you're talking about these books and you're talking about all these Netflix, the 13th, and, you know, and When They See Us and all these other things, for me, it's traumatic. It's trauma. Like, why would I watch that? It is Black trauma for me, because I know people who have had this happen, and there, but for the grace of God, go I. Like, it has, you know, I've been in situations, but I haven't been in awful situations. And if I've been in situations, I've been able to get myself out of situations. But not everybody's that lucky. And again, if you have video, you hope everything works out. Even if you have video with police officers, the way our system is set up is the prosecuting attorney that has to prosecute the police officer in that one case needs the police for an entire bunch of cases so that they can get reelected. So the system is set up to where the police have the judicial essentially by the neck, no pun intended, where if you go against theirs, and it sounds just like a gang, if you go against one of theirs, they're going to they're going to say, well, we're going to stop policing if we're not allowed to do our job the way we want to. I've never seen any other industry that is acceptable and okay. It's insane. And that's where you get into what Eric was saying is about, look, we got to defund the police departments. We got to reimagine what those things look like.
Quickly on that, because a lot of people, when they hear defunding the police, that sounds like such a radical idea, but maybe it's not that radical. Can you quickly explain what that means, defunding the police?
It doesn't mean getting rid of police. It means taking some of the money, because they get billions of dollars, and taking it out of the hands of police departments where they're militarizing police forces so that all the weapons that the military doesn't use and all the money that they get that they're using against the people, all it means is to take some of that money from police enforcement and put it into education, put it into social programs, put it into neighborhoods where it's needed, as opposed to sending the military in the form of policemen after us. Take some of the money and do something else with it, because they don't need that much money. There's no reason that the average cop should be making over $100,000 and then can make another $100,000 in overtime. This is ridiculous. This is just once again, the system working for those that it works for and not for the people. So it's about moving some of the money more than getting rid of policemen. No one's suggesting that we want to reform the police, but the money is too much money in their hands.
Becoming more and more, it's beginning to sound like a police state. So my next question, and maybe this is an unfair one. So we know that Trump is horrible in handling, and that's not the unfair part. He's horrible in handling. He doesn't even pretend like he cares about the issue. Many have said that he's actually add fuel to the fire. But at the same time, 2009 was quite historic. It was 2009, I believe. 2009 was quite historic. The U.S. elected its first Black president. And another history is that he was elected twice. So here you have a two-term Black president in recent years, just before Trump. My question is, why why didn't it get better under his term? Is it, or did it get better? I'm not sure. But did he drop the ball, or was there too much opposition, or was this just too big of a problem to be solved by that one person? Because Black Lives Matter actually started in Obama's term, right? And Obama famously said, if I had a son, it would look like Trayvon Martin. So he definitely cares about the issue. But what went wrong there? Or maybe something did went right. I'm cognizant that Curtis actually worked under Obama's first term. So I don't know, Curtis, do you want to go first, or should we let other people kind of like chime in first? Up to you.
Yeah, well, I'll kick it off with this, and just with an understanding of our government and the way it works, right? Like, so a lot of these things that are happening are on local levels. So those are cities and those are states. And so we have state rights and then we have national rights. And so no president actually influences what happens on the ground in any particular state per se. Now, the rhetoric and the discussions are definitely influential. But what I believe you had was, with his election, a fear of where the country, for some people, was going. And we have something in the United States called white flight. So in communities where there are suburbs and different areas where there are the better schools than there are in the urban areas in the United States. And I want to make this 100% clear before I go any further. Slums and impoverished areas are planned. They are not on accident. They are not because people don't work hard. They are not because people don't want a better life for themselves. Like, they love to live in squalor and things of that nature. That does not happen. They are planned by people who are in power to ensure that the resources are allocated elsewhere. And so when we have these things and you have people who are gainfully employed and they're able to move out to areas where there are better schools, white people, when they see African Americans come in, they think property value is going to drop and they leave. And that's essentially the same thing when you have an African American president on just a much bigger scale. So you have all of these flashpoints where there's an expectation that, he's going to be, in quotes, Black Moses, and he's going to lead everybody to the promised land. But there's really so much any president can do. Like this, Donald Trump did not put his knee on, George Floyd's neck. However, his rhetoric makes it at least more acceptable for those who are interested in it. Barack Obama saying that, my son could look like Trayvon Martin does not change the hearts and minds of your the everyday citizen. And so, Martin Luther King talked about this during his I Have a Dream speech. And one of the things he said was, right before he talked about I Have a Dream, was the United States has issued us as African Americans a check, and it has come back with insufficient funds. You have not lived up to the promise of what this place is. And so when he's saying that in 1965, the election of one Black man once or twice does not eliminate, again, 400 years of just systemic issues and racism.
That's a great point. Eric, do you have something to say?
Yeah, sure. To Curtis's point, I think the reason that Obama won had more to do with him as a candidate than America changing its mind about racism. He got 60 million votes. A lot of white people actually obviously voted for Obama. One man can't change a history of racism, a structure of power. I think a lot of the talk about racism is about power. You know, it's one thing to vote for somebody for your own interest. It's something else to willingly give up power, economic power, political power, for the sake of somebody else. So, I mean, I've heard that a lot. You know, Obama, he won the presidency, therefore America's not racist. Well, Black people were probably racist, probably still voted for Obama. You know, and I think we went in a different direction with Trump as a response to Obama for those who thought that we were going in a different direction, a very liberal direction. And now we see where we're at right now. So yeah, I mean, it's when you jokingly said, "Oh, are things? Am I hopeful for the future?" And my answer is time will tell. You know, it's one thing to say, you know, this month, this week, everybody has a Black Lives Matter sign in their window and they're posting things. But again, how many corporations are gonna, you know, are going to step down and have new leadership? You know, is a white man going to step down and have a Black woman, you know, take his place? You know, that to me is like a change that we need to see long term. You know, yeah, it's great to write a check, you know, for you know, a nonprofit, but these boards are full of people who don't look like us. You know, in my mind, we shouldn't even. Ultimately, there wouldn't be a need for nonprofits, honestly, if there's economic, you know, parity. And there's structural changes, we would need to have, you know, someone else helping us out in certain ways. So that's a long-term answer. That's not just what happened in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah, just I'm sorry, Arief, real quick. One of the things that, you know, jumping in that Eric reminded me of is, and this is something that this group can do, we have to get out of this space of thinking of Barack Obama as Barack Obama and not an African American, or thinking of LeBron James as LeBron James and not an African American, right? We do this thing, and it happens historically where, you know, Tiger Woods, well, he's Tiger Woods, he's not Black. Will Smith is Will Smith, he's not Black. No, everybody, we have an expression like everybody wants to be Black until they have to be Black. Like, you can't be Jay-Z, you can't be Beyonce and not be Breonna Taylor and not be George Floyd. Right? It all comes with it. Like, you can't take the good and leave the bad. Like, no, you need all of it. And one of the things we did at America is if you performed R&B, rap, or anything, you got a history lesson from me, because I'm like, look, you cannot profit off of this culture without knowing the history of said culture. Like, and that's a very big thing. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more about what folks can do, but you have to know the history and you have to check each other on the history.
That's a great point, and I'm going to come back to that point because I think that's a very important one. Before that, Barbara, would you like to say maybe a short a statement about this, about the question?
Well, you talked about Barack Obama. You know, as he was saying, the way our government votes works. You had a Senate of Republicans who were totally opposed to anything that he did or tried to do. As he said, he was the president of the United States, not just of Black people. And had he been able to do the things he wanted to do for the people of the United States, it would have also benefited Black people. But he was stopped, his hands were tied at every turn. Even when he wanted to give money to states to help build a high-speed railroad or to help them do things, they didn't want the money because they said, because it was coming from him, they would rather not take it. It was their own money, but because it was a Black man that was doing it, giving it. It's like our healthcare system. And when it was called Obamacare, people hate Obamacare, but they love the ACA, which is the Affordable Care Act. It's the same.
I remember that.
You know,
it became so politicized that every attempt from him was completely
stopped. Every turn. And then when Trump was elected, many people said, now you see how we felt with Obama, which is so totally not true, because Obama was trying to help people, not hurt them. And that's a big difference. But that's what people say a lot of Trump.
Right. I'm cognizant of time, but I'm also hearing people saying that I hope this goes on for longer than an hour. It will definitely. We scheduled it for 1.5 hours. maybe we'll go for 2 hours if we need to, because
Yeah.
this all is very, very enlightening. So my next question is, as Kennedy pointed out in the beginning, there's been a lot of protests and movements in the past 5 to 10 years on this particular issue, on the issue of race. But somehow this feels different. I might be wrong, but this feels different. And the reason for that is I remember how much flack the movement got before this one, of like, for example, when Colin Kaepernick, which is a football athlete, a football star, took a knee during the what do you call it, the national anthem, people were criticizing him for being deeply unpatriotic. But now, for example, you see like a lot of people are actually now saying that what he did was right, and actually also kneeling. Even the police officers are kneeling now, some of them. And it seems like CEOs and companies are pledging donations or coming up with new policies. Politicians even are starting to get in line. So this feels different. Does it feel different to you? Is this accurate? And do you feel we will get something different this time than the last movements we had? Is it a tipping point?
I think it's different this time because you have more buy-in from a larger community of people outside of just Black people. At the end of the day, it comes down to economics. Again, all these companies are saying Black Lives Matter, or we're thinking about our board and we're restructuring and we're trying to do better, and people are reading books and all this stuff. But it comes down to these corporations knowing that that is what you're supposed to say right now. 5 years ago, people didn't want to say Black Lives Matter. Now everybody's saying Black Lives Matter. They're saying it because if they don't say it, it's not going to be good for their bottom line. So, is it genuine or not? I mean, who knows? Again, I keep going back to, it's going to take time to really see the serious changes in these corporations to see if they're serious or not. I mean, even with the NFL, Colin Kaepernick was doing this 5 years ago. They were adamantly against him. You have half of the NFL owners are Trump supporters. So on one hand, they're saying, giving him $5 million. On one hand, saying that we stand with these Black players. The NFL is 70% Black, but yet we're giving money to somebody who is obviously against these Black players. So now I think it comes down to, how do you force these people to have to act with their dollars? And you can't always change somebody's conscience or their heart, but you can maybe change policy because they don't want to lose money. So that to me is probably more important than really sincerely begging somebody to see you as a human, and trying to explain to them, like Curtis just did, the history of racism. There's tons of books, there's tons of video. Like, it's not hard to understand.
The money
you have
at the end, huh?
now who are just getting it in 2020. Just getting it now.
Yeah.
So for me, it's one thing to say, back to your earlier question, is it our responsibility to teach and talk to people to help them change their minds? I mean, I think some people who are good at doing that, great, and others who don't have time for that, that's fine too. But I'm really more concerned about actions and policy than I am about what's in their heart, because their heart could change in a minute, and who knows? Who knows what happens 6 months from now?
Yeah.
Well, I think America's inherent racism is why this is working right now, because Black people have been in the streets for 400 years, but now that white people are in the streets screaming Black Lives Matter, now corporations are listening, people are listening. I've been to marches that are mostly white, and seeing the sea of whiteness makes it more visible than when it's just Black people, or mostly Black and Latino people. So now it's like, the film I did on racism, I use white male experts to tell how racism works. Because if I had a Black man or Black woman, it would be seen as they're just complaining, that's just their thing. But a white male saying, this is how it's done, this is what it's done, this is what we do, suddenly people can hear it. And I think all of these white allies coming out and joining us and being out there. I was at a protest where the police started to attack some Black protesters. And there was a yell for help, white people to the front. And out of nowhere, all these white people came up, surrounded, got in front of the cops, had the Black protesters behind them, and the white protesters put up their hands and said, hands up, don't shoot, hands up, don't shoot. And it de-escalated the police because they weren't gonna attack those white kids, and the white people were protecting the Black people. So I think those white allies have come out and should have come out and should stay out, because racism is really their problem. It affects us, but it's their problem. It's their issue. So having them out there saying it, and you know, even though it's kind of annoying that everybody wants to ask you questions about it, it's also shows you how far the white community is trying to move. At least our white allies are trying to move. And I think that their visibility is forcing corporations to go, okay. Also, I also think that Black people need to understand how much economic power that we have on our own. And if we spent a day or two and didn't buy anything, we could bring the country to its knees on our own. So. Yeah.
That's it's hard to wrap my mind around that. It's kind of, I don't know how I feel about that. In one perspective, it's really good that we are seeing white allies really supporting the movement. In another side, it shows the inherent racism, like you said. Yeah, that's really interesting.
But yeah. It's with racism. Racism is dumb, and we know, and we're smarter than that. So we can use racism to achieve the goals that we need to have, because they're gonna do the same stupid thing every time. So we're ahead of them so far, and we just have to use it to make it, you know?
Yeah, a necessary evil, I suppose. Okay. So let's talk about global spillovers on like the Black Lives movements or the BLM movements, and I'd like to get and we're gonna move into what this means for Indonesia. But before that, I'd like to get Hadi's perspective from a media practitioners. What's been happening here? How are Indonesians responding to this issue?
Yeah, thanks, Arief. I think coming from a media background of things, am I?
Oh, we can't hear you anymore. It's Indonesian internet for you.
I think why we try to figure out
Sure.
having there. Obviously, I live here. I'm Indonesian, and but obviously we've seen how it's had like a global outcry, right? The world is in solidarity, from Canada to Syria. Everyone, everyone is. I think internally everyone has known that it's been an issue, but I think this time, like we've talked about earlier, everyone's kind of locked in, and everyone's kind of fed up, like obviously it's a very interesting time, Corona and all. So I think people are even just sensitive to, like, pardon my language, like bullshit, you know what I mean? So I think this one just hits differently. And I want to say this really quick before we get Hadi back on that, the coronavirus was kind of the first time that some Asians felt discriminated against in the US, right? So if I had to bring it back home, because all of a sudden it was like you know, you didn't have to be from China. All you had to be was, and you were getting, you know, there were a lot of racist things happening with Asians there. So, you know, it kind of hopefully puts you on that seat a little bit, and you understand how these things work somehow. And to be honest, you know, this whole conversation we're having, like Eric and Barbara and Curtis articulated earlier, it's really just a human conversation, you know. So as far as how it relates to Indonesians, it's literally just, you know, if you put yourself, you know, if you put yourself in the shoes of whoever is being oppressed, the Black folks being oppressed, you know, like how you know, how would you respond? How, if you know the history, and like Curtis mentioned earlier, about not wanting to share this with Americans. You know, I felt some sort of burden to do the same thing here. I do that in my work here. I kind of incorporate, you know, so I just do that naturally. That's something I love to do, incorporate, like, I'm Black, like, so I just gotta have some flavor in things that I do here, you know. So I felt the responsibility to, I mean, at some point I was answering people individually, you know, then obviously we're talking about putting a talk together, but I also felt responsible. I feel like people are well-intentioned here, and then that's why you guys are here on this talk, and I appreciate that. And people want to, people don't know it. We can assume people know all the intricacies of American politics, you know, so so that's why, as far as it's relating to Indonesians, there's just not, I would imagine a lot of the things they see are on TV, you know, a lot of sometimes the bad and negative stereotypes, but to be honest, it's a human conversation. You know, it can happen to you in a split of a second, which happened to Asians in the US the last couple of months, you know, with the coronavirus thing. And people were, you know, it was a shock to the Asian community, but it happens. It can happen to you just like that. Now, imagine if that's your daily life, if that's what, you know, if this is how you live. You know, you wake up in the morning, you're Black, so you're constantly confronting these issues. So I think that the timing of it all was very interesting, because Asians got a chance to just get a little bit of a taste, you know. And the irony in it all, I'm just gonna add this little caveat there. Like, one of the police officers was Asian, right? With the George Floyd case, which was unfortunate, but that was just something to note, right? So since we're in Asia here, just to, it's not necessarily all a white versus Black thing, you know. Sometimes, you know, people get caught up in these things. All right, so that's my 2 cents. I think we have Hadi back.
I think so. And what happened to Kennedy 2 nights ago, it wasn't white people that ambushed him, it was Indonesians. Yeah, we all have blind spots. Hadi, maybe you can say something to that about, like, not only how it's spilling over here, but also how have you been seeing the Asian community and the African community kind of supporting each other?
Yeah, I think to add to that point, I guess one of the concrete proof that you know, the Asian and African communities have been going really strong in the book of history was the establishments of the Bandung Conference, right? I think a lot of Indonesians, and I think I read it somewhere that the Black Lives Matter movement was also influenced and was also inspired by the Bandung Conference. Is actually one of the first large-scale Asian African countries coming together and cooperating and making these agreements. So I guess the history has been there because we have very similar values. We have a similar desire to be independent on our own 2 feet. But I think fast forward many years later until today, we have seen a lot of cooperations also in the terms of cultural. I think we've seen things like that are maybe quite obvious, such as the role of fashion, for example. We've seen so many Japanese, for example, right, Japanese fashion designers or Japanese brand owners working together with African American celebrities or brand owners, and we've seen something like Richiga, you know, in Indonesia itself, like, you know, someone with an Asian background, someone with a Chinese background heritage, but adapting and getting inspired by the Black culture that is so influential, and making it, some sort of a collaboration. I would say that, and I think that speaks a lot about how the Asian and African community are always working hand in hand. But I guess to add to the earlier question that was being asked, I guess it's important for us to remember that because Indonesia is such a big country with almost 300 million people, we have. I mean, we cannot deny the fact that the education level and the education of everyone in Indonesia is vastly different, right? So there's always a group of people who are, I would say, ignorant, but borderline not well informed, that just doesn't care about what's happening. But there's a group of people who is risingly and increasingly getting more educated, who really cares and starts to really care, and to see that what's happening in the States is actually a trigger for us to self-reflect on ourselves, right? Like, where are we on human rights? And that's something that's, I think, very, very interesting. But I feel like we cannot detach the power and the significance of media and education in Indonesia as something that hopefully can reduce both the systematic and the individual racism in the mid to long term in this country. Yeah, I think that's my thoughts.
Thanks, Hadi, for your thoughts. And you also mentioned a very interesting and also a problematic case of the rapper Rich Brian, right? He's like an Indonesian, and he's like, he was a rising star. He is still maybe a rising star. He decided to change his name to Rich Brian because people pushed back on that. I think who was talking about? I think it was Curtis, right? Of how culture, or like Black culture, is exported outside of the U.S. and Indonesia's import that. We have rap, we have like Black inspired fashions and style and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But without this historical baggage, right? It can be seen as kind of like profiteering. Do you think, Hadi, are people aware of that at all here, you think?
I think as the rapper themselves, or as the creators, they are. Okay, where do I stand on this? I need to be I need to be careful in what I say. Well, I guess it depends, right? If they are genuinely well educated and well conversed, and they do understand the historical knowledge of the culture itself, and then create something that's good out of it, I think that is a good thing, right? Yeah. But I think the problem with Indonesians, again, with the level of education and the education system that has not been developed, and I dare to say has been quite backward for many, many years now. People are just quite ignorant, and I think the absence of credible media, the absence of well-educated media itself, is not helping this phenomenon at all. So, adding to that, you see things like celebrities and Instagrammers and influencers, because whether you like it or hate it, it's the media that people consume nowadays, right? They consume influencers content, they consume YouTubers content, and it's very dangerous, and we need to be aware of this. I guess what's happening, I was actually quite shocked by a post that was made by a YouTuber sometimes a month ago, when he tried to show his support for the Blackout Tuesday hashtag movement by uploading a photo of him in a blackface makeup, right? So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if he was if he was trying to be funny, or I don't know if he was trying to show his support by his creations or anything. But I just felt like that was very outrageous, right? That wasn't the right thing to do it, considering that he had 2.5 million followers.
Wow, I didn't hear that.
Yeah, that's huge. But what was more shocking to me was the fact that when I looked at the comment section, I was ready, right? I was ready for, you know, getting my popcorn. I was ready for people to show their outrage, but apparently not. People are just like, oh, this is funny. Oh yeah. So I think that shows something that the generic community and the generic population of Indonesians, we still have a lot of homework to do before we can, you know, achieve that kind of level. I guess.
Yeah. There's a lot of history. Yeah, Kennedy, go ahead.
I'll just add to that, just because you know, I live here, obviously, so I have this one leg in, one leg out thing, and like I said earlier, you know, I watch. I don't even call it cultural appropriation. I'm sure people are well-intentioned, but like Hadi said, you know, just knowledge, you know, understanding context with things. You know, I know in Indonesia here, if you go into malls, like when the music plays, they still use the N-word, you know? And I think it's like, for my American friends, I'm sure it's kind of like bizarre. Like what do you mean? Like, but literally it's not edited out. So you just stroll in with, you know, and then you hear these things. And so this thing kind of sips through a little bit, you know, and just diversity. It's not really the most diverse city, to be honest. And I'm talking about with brown and black folks, you know, in Jakarta. It's a thing. And it's one of the things I've incorporated into what I do for a living. I'm always nervous around places that are not diverse, honestly, because, you know, there's something about other, you know what I mean? When you're not comfortable with something, you know, you almost can be flustered or something. So the idea of people not being too comfortable seeing brown folks, people of color, I'm not necessarily talking about black, you know, Spanish, whatever, South American, whatever, you know, that's the thing here. And we try to incorporate that. We do an Asia Africa Film Festival. You know, I did a creative summit a couple of years ago, and not necessarily planned, but most of the people on the panel were Africans. You know, like the head of Puma Select was from Morocco, friends from Amsterdam were Africans, and it was not planned. But yeah, the truth of the matter is, like, it's a very interesting conversation. Black people basically champion the culture we all consume in some form, you know, from fashion, film, sports, all of that stuff, no matter how it's remixed, right? And so when it sifts through, it's just about context, you know, like as it relates to fashion, I have friends who are in fashion here and in other cities as well. And even if it's streetwear or however it's called, streetwear, I think sometimes people don't even realize, you know, what that means. You know, I think sometimes I've never heard some of these people talk about Black Lives Matter or be socially conscious per se. And maybe the one time they talk about Black Lives Matter, they talk about looting or something. You know what I mean? So, but the irony is that streetwear culture, which is kind of birthed from hip hop, you know, there's graffiti. You know, it's kind of like a protest type of movement, you know, where you're anti-establishment, you know, or you're challenging establishment. So I just want people to get that. And for me, I feel responsible when I have friends like that. I feel like I have to probably do a better job of just, which I try to do, honestly, just give people context. I think almost everyone here, they're well-intentioned. You know, no one is running around in blackface like the one, you know what I mean? But I think most people are well-intentioned. It's all context. And I think it has to do with education. It has to do with even things you know, media, you know, like the messaging, you know, like the visuals you see, not just stereotypes that are being shown and all that. So, so as far as someone that lives here, you know, I see a lot of that, and I think there's still work to be done. And hopefully conversations like these help, you know?
Yeah, that's such a good point. And yeah, I feel like that topic alone can have a separate session, a separate talk show, because it's so interesting how on one side, it's a great achievement that Black culture, Black music Black fashion is being recognized all over the world. In another sense, it can be used inappropriately and offensively as well. Okay, maybe we'll come to an answer to that, or nearing an answer to that at the end of this. I realize that a lot of the...
Eric has his hand up, I think.
Oh, sorry. Did not see that. Go ahead, Eric.
Oh, I was actually just coughing. I was trying to cough correctly.
Of
You know
course.
about my
Because you're in public, right? Thank you for being so considerate. Yeah. I see a lot of comments about how this plays out in Indonesia, how people not only see race, but see color in general, how there's an anti-blackness of how I think someone said, oh, don't go outside, your skin will be darker, you know, and just stay inside, and these whitening lotions and all that kind of stuff. And so I want to turn to my friend, Michael. Michael, are you there?
Yes, Mas Arief.
Right. So Michael has opted, he can speak English, I think, fine. But I think he's more comfortable using Bahasa, and maybe I translate, or what do you think, Michael?
Yeah, I think I will speak in Bahasa.
Okay, sure. I'll help translate. But can you understand my, you can understand my...
I can follow you all. Yeah.
So, Michael, when you hear these stories, obviously the context is different. The history might be different. But can you relate to these experiences as a Papuan? So for those of you who don't know, Papua is the most eastern province of Indonesia. And it's majority, I suppose it's a Melanesian race. So it's Black people. And so when you hear these experiences, Michael, can you relate, and can you tell me how have your experience of racism been in Indonesia?
Ya, kalau dari saya pribadi, saya juga pernah alami apa yang tadi Kennedy cerita di awal, about 2 days ago. Itu saya pikir mereka memperlakukan saya setelah mereka sama, maksudnya sama itu dia melihat kita orang Papua itu ya tidak pantas diperlakukan adil oleh sebagian orang yang tidak terpelajar sebenarnya. Saya pernah diberhentikan suatu malam waktu pulang kerja, saya menyanyi di Institut Kesenian Jakarta, saya capek sekali. Dan saya dalam perjalanan pulang, saya diberhentikan, dan itu oleh polisi yang saya pikir sebagai yang akan mengamankan kita ya sebagai warga negara. Saya diberhentikan, dan itu kejadian sekitar 10 tahun yang lalu. Kebetulan juga ada kejadian mahasiswa Papua di Surabaya, dan langsung dia mengeneralisasi bahwa dia seperti ada razia. Jadi dia memerintahkan taksi karena dia lihat di dalam ada saya gitu. Dia pikir saya orang Afrika atau orang mana. Dia pas lihat gini, wow, ini ya a black guy di belakang. Dia berhentikan, terus sopir taksinya bilang, kenapa Pak? Enggak, saya mau lihat, boleh berhenti sebentar, saya mau lihat siapa yang ada di belakang. Terus saya bilang sama sopir taksinya, Pak, tolong kasih tahu dia kalau ada, saya tidak ada urusan sama dia. Kalau dia memberhentikan taksi, berarti dia urusannya sama Bapak mungkin dilihat SIM, STNK, dan surat-surat lain. Kenapa dia harus tanya saya? Terus dia tetap paksa untuk, tidak, saya mau memeriksa si penumpang. Terus dia lihat, iya dia ke belakang dia, saya. Mas Arief mau langsung translate atau? Gimana?
Gimana?
Mas Arief mau langsung translate itu yang tadi saya cerita.
Boleh. Maybe I'll translate halfway. So Michael was saying that what happened to Kennedy actually happened to Michael. This was 10 years ago in Jakarta after he was performing. He was really, really tired. He was going back from a performance by a taxi, and the taxi was stopped. And the taxi wasn't stopped for, it wasn't like a traffic violation or something, but he was, I suppose, forcing Michael to get out of the taxi so he can question him. And there was no other reason besides that he was black. I believe maybe before that there was some Papuan demonstrations, and maybe and he felt like he needed to generalize, oh, this is a black guy, and so we need to question him. Is that kind of what happened, right?
Ya, dan sangat disesalkan karena saya pikir, oh ini yang memberhentikan bukan apa misalnya preman atau apa, ini malah polisi dengan pakaian seragam, dan dia langsung bilang, coba saya lihat KTP kamu. Saya bilang, Bapak tidak ada urusan sama saya. Kalau Bapak punya urusan, Bapak urusan sama Bapak driver. Kenapa harus saya yang ditanya? Terus, nah, tidak, kamu kasih identitas kamu. Pas dia baca, dia lihat saya, terus sepertinya dia kenal, terus dia lihat, oh kamu ini ya, yang penyanyi itu ya. Terus dia bukannya merasa malu atau apa gitu, dia malah bolehlah 1-2 lembar gitu bagi-bagi dulu ke saya. Jadi saya merasa bahwa wow, maksudnya untuk segala situasi kamu memberhentikan cuma karena kamu lihat di belakang saya berkulit hitam, terus kamu mengait-ngaitkan dengan kejadian di Surabaya, dan kamu malah meminta uang dan kamu menggunakan seragam itu sangat memalukan. Maksudnya saya menyayangkan karena dia seorang yang menurut saya well educated ya, tapi dia melakukan itu. Dan yang saya lihat dengan terjadi di Papuan Lives Matter itu mereka gerakan itu seperti berkaitan dengan Black Lives Matter itu karena apa? Mereka merasa ini momen yang tepat untuk kita juga menyuarakan hak kita, karena banyak sekali pelanggaran HAM yang di Papua yang terjadi, yang seharusnya mereka dapat perlindungan dari yang sang pemegang hukum malah tidak dapat gitu.
Okay, great point. Let me translate that quickly. So what happened was he was forced to show his ID. At first, he persisted. You have no business looking at my ID. But eventually he showed his ID, and the police realized that he was the singer, and he recognized him. And what happened next was he wasn't like maybe, oh, I know you, or oh, I like your music, or something like that. He asked him for money for I don't know what it was. It wasn't even a bribe. You didn't even do anything wrong. But he asked him for money, and he felt really, really disappointed by this, because he sees the police as someone that is supposed to serve and protect. So Michael is saying also that the Papuan Lives Matter that came right after the Black Lives Matter is really representing a bigger issue like this, because for those of you who don't know, the Papuan history is one that is riddled with human rights violation. It is, I urge you to kind of like study up on that, where Papuans are just treated differently by law enforcement. There was a huge, for example, this is from me, just to give context. There was a huge anti-racism protest last year because a dorm that was filled with Papuan people was attacked, and people used racial slurs and all that kind of stuff. And the police was actually there also. Some of them was maybe participating. And so they had a big demonstration in Papua, and guess what? They were all arrested. These demonstrators were arrested, and now some of them are in court and already sentenced to 7 to 40 years for treason. So, I mean, it's a whole kind of like history also there. But this is what Michael was saying. This is part of a larger, I guess, problem. Yeah, continue, Michael.
Ya, jadi ini sangat tergerak begitu kita melihat gerakan Black Lives Matter di Amerika, langsung ya sebagai anak-anak Papua yang merasa bahwa ini saatnya kita bersuara. Mereka yang sadar dan mereka yang mau menyuarakan ini ke publik. Mereka ya seperti buat gerakan Papua Lives Matter supaya mungkin semua orang Indonesia juga aware bahwa kejadian ini juga terjadi di bangsa kita, dan saya Papua, saya Indonesia, saudara kamu sendiri, maksudnya kami sendiri tidak bisa melakukan apa-apa kalau kita tidak bersama-sama menyuarakan ini. Jadi yang saya lihat itu kenapa saya juga dalam beberapa sesi ada ikut dalam Zoom meeting seperti ini, karena saya mau menyuarakan itu bahwa kita pemerintah kita sendiri sadar bahwa pemerintah dan ya itu seperti tadi Pak polisi, mereka sendiri tidak memperlakukan kita dengan seadil-adilnya, dan ini bukan masalah soal orang Papua saja, ini masalah orang Indonesia juga. Papua Lives Matter, semua kehidupan itu matter ya, berharga ya.
So he's saying that this is the reason why people are now starting to speak up about Papuan issues, and he on that point of allyship, the reason why he talks about this stuff is because they can't do it alone. Indonesians, non-Papuan Indonesians, need to join the fight, I suppose. I want to, you told me a fantastic story. Was it last year at Idea Fest? About the name of your band.
Oh yeah.
You're in the band called Noge, N-O-G-E-I. Explain to me where that came from.
Ya, itu kami mengangkat nama ini karena tadi seperti yang Barbara sampaikan ya, bahwa mereka mempergunakan nama ini sebagai jokes. Maksudnya kita tidak tahu memanggil nama itu dengan maksud untuk menjatuhkan atau apa. Tapi Noge sendiri dari arti kata yang sebenarnya adalah teman, sahabat, karib, dan artinya sangat bagus sekali. Tapi itu dipakai sebagai bahasa rasial untuk menjatuhkan kita. Noge itu sebagai kamu itu telanjang, kamu itu orang Papua itu hitam, kamu itu bau, kamu itu monyet sampai dikatakan. Ya. Jadi Noge itu sendiri saya dan teman saya mau memilih supaya kita mengembalikan ke arti nama sebenarnya, bahwa Noge itu sahabat, Noge itu karib, Noge itu sahabat yang melebihi saudara kandung. Jadi kita mau merangkul semua melalui kita punya musik seperti itu.
Yeah. So the word Noge is used by people who come to Papua, by outsiders, to racially demean Papuans. However, the word Noge actually, in Papua, it means sobat is a friend or even best friend. It has actually a really noble meaning. And so he saw that the word was being polluted by people that are coming to the island, and he chose to use that word as a band name because he wanted to restore the name, the meaning of the word. And I think that's just really, really powerful. And I also remember you telling me the story of a lot of people, a lot of Papuans were angry that you used that name, but you sent them your records, you sent them your CDs, and you explained to them, this is what I'm trying to do. And actually all of them said, Godspeed, this is great. Your message is powerful. So yeah, that's really, really interesting. Okay. We're a bit over time, but maybe we can extend this to 20 minutes more. What I want to ask to each and every one of the panelists is, what does real work look like? Like, how can everyone here after this session do or think to really challenge themselves or the system in order to destroy racism we see in the US and Indonesia, globally? Who wants to start?
For me, it's about changing policy, economically, politically, socially, structurally, really making fundamental changes in your workplace, in your family. I mean, it's obviously a little bit harder to do it outside of the US, but I have a lot of people I know, a lot of white people I know in the US who say they want to do certain things, but then they don't want to rock the system. They don't want to say the wrong thing in front of their family, or they don't want to get fired from their jobs, or they don't want to, you know, mess up relationships with their friends. So it's some tough work that has to be done. You have to be willing to lose something, like we've lost something for 400 years, you know? So I think, you know, one thing that we can definitely do is policy change. Again, you can't always change what's in somebody's heart, but maybe you can force them to do certain things. So voters' rights right now is going to be a big issue for the election coming up. I mean, you see suppression all across the country in Kentucky. How do we force local politicians to be on the right side of voters' rights? Again, in corporations, how do you make sure that you have diversity on the board? The hiring practices reflect the society, not just one kind of person. So again, it's forcing people to make these tough decisions. That's something that we all can do. And just being uncomfortable, you know, being uncomfortable is part of it.
That's such a thing. All right, who else?
I agree with what Eric is saying. There's also a saying that if you see something, say something. Don't just let it go by when you're at dinner with your racist family. And just like, I don't want to, like he said, rock the boat or whatever. Because if you don't speak up against it, a lot of people don't understand what racism is. That seems ridiculous, but they don't. And so you have to, you see something, you say something. You have to make it aware. Because Toni Morrison said that we need to get, in order for us to be really free, we have to free ourselves of the white man's gaze. And if we're always have that thought of not hurting their feelings, being very gentle with them and how you do this, then it's like a child. They're not gonna grow up, you know. So you have to tell them. And one thing on that whole international thing I wanted to say is that white supremacy, the behavior of white supremacy is international, even when there are not white people around. It still is there. So, you know, it's not surprising that, you know, Black people or darker people in India, darker people are treated differently. So that is all the legacy of white supremacy and colonialism, which is always the way. So, yeah, I think being more aware and saying something about it is important.
That's such a good point, that white supremacy doesn't necessarily require white people. And yeah, sometimes like we have these behaviors that we tolerate from people because of if that's just his character, or oh, he's just old, or, you know, like we need to start calling them out and educating them. Curtis.
Yeah, so I echo what BA and Eric said, especially when it comes to Indonesians. One of the things that we always would have is people's intention not to offend by asking questions. You have to ask those questions. You have to be uncomfortable. And you think of any type of growth is painful and uncomfortable. it's necessary. It's absolutely necessary. Call out microaggressions when they happen, especially in Indonesia, because the expectation is it's just going to let it fly. Because again, the cultural aspects, and you cannot do it. And it doesn't have to be emotionally charged, or it can be just like, look, this is wrong, and I'm going to explain to you why it's wrong, or it can be. But either way, the conversations need to happen. The shit needs to be stopped right then and there. The fact that we are, I think, close to 2 hours in and we still have 45 participants is a great first, start and everybody who's on should give themselves a hand for being here. When we talked about the cultural aspects of things, I want to shout out a couple people like Iwake, Psychoji, Indonesians, Sinta Storms, and who are in the United States, who are Indonesian, who are speaking on these issues, from that perspective and that point of view, and who are married to African Americans. So follow these individuals who legit understand and know the culture. Gita is on, and one of the things that Gita and I talk about is she's like, look, I read. She's like, that's my contribution. I read and I can give background on all these books and racial aspects of the books that I'm reading in Bahasa Indonesia. She can give the reviews in Bahasa Indonesia. So whatever your niche is and whatever your talent is, you can use it to inward face. And one of the things I absolutely love about this global reckoning is everybody's not only looking at the United States, which is extremely important, but they're looking at home. And which is why I really appreciate what Michael said. It's like, you have to, right? What helps me as an African American in Indonesia is not you giving money to Black Lives Matter in the United States, but how are you working with Papuan lives, and how are you talking to Chinese Indonesian issues, and how are you really addressing the things that are at home? Because God knows I see it, and we can act like it's not there, but everybody I know knows it is. So being comfortable with being uncomfortable, as Eric said, is extremely important.
Yeah. That's great. Being comfortable with the uncomfortable. Hadi, you want to say something on this?
Yeah, I think I hope I can represent what's happening in Indonesia and of course Indonesians generally. I think we have this culture, right, as an Indonesian, that we feel like, oh, we are nobody. We are one of 300 million population. What can we do? What can we do differently? Especially if we are not in the realms of politics and in the positions where we actually have the power to change and to influence and to impact, right? But I think for a lot of Indonesians, we should really self-reflect and not avoiding the fact that we can do something within our personal capacity. I think first of all is getting ourselves educated in the sense of, I like what Charis has mentioned, that we have to read, we have to be critical, we have to find out informations instead of just accepting every sort of information that is being presented to us. But I think more than that, we need to reflect and look into what can we do personally within our personal circle, right? I mean, for example, like what we do in our company, since the beginning of the conception, we know that we have to be inclusive. So we never look at people from their religion, from their gender, from their race even, right? So I think that's something that I thought I can do as a company owner, as a business owner, that this is my responsibility. But I guess a lot of Indonesians have to also realize that they are a part of a bigger system, right? They cannot keep on looking at themselves and ourselves even at just being a small part of a country, a small part of a community who has no impact. Because I think like whatever we say yes to and whatever we say no to will place us in a position where we are either a part of the problem or we are either a part of the solution and advancement of human rights, of humanity. And that's something that's especially challenging for a lot of Asians, especially Indonesians, because we always have this culture of being, nggak enak, right? Like it's impolite to say no, it's impolite to call out. We Indonesians, we have to be courteous, we have to be polite and friendly. And I think that's why the issue of racism, the issue of sexual harassment even, is something that has never been a popular issue to be talked about, to be highlighted about, because people are just like, yeah, I'm a nobody. I cannot talk back. I cannot call out. I cannot. So I think that's something we really need to look into as an Indonesian as well.
Also, it's like, it's particularly on young people trying to communicate to older people. There's like, oh, you have to be polite to older people. And so that's like frowned upon. Michael, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, maybe because for me, as a what I see in my country, because Indonesia is very multi-ethnic, how to overcome this racism against Papuan. I think the first thing to do is to set a mindset that not all people are in the same box. We need to accept the different, being humble to receive any unfamiliar, because no, not all we can go to other places, like from the east to the west, or from the west to the east, but sometimes they look, we all as a general. So we need to ask the different, and we need to see each other from like from our box, how to see each other from, I mean, like they should see me from my point of view. I think, yeah, that's it.
Thank you for that, Michael. So we're about to close, and those are really, really powerful statements. Thank you all for the speakers. We're about to close, but before that, there's a special treat for all of you from Michael. And before I send this over to Kennedy, Michael will like to sing a song for us. This is really great. Michael is, for you, those of you who don't know, the finalist of the first Indonesian Idol in Indonesia. I remember watching that show, and like, it was new and it was fun. And actually, as a family, we all rooted for Michael. Actually, we were big fans of him in that first one. We wanted him to win.
I owe you, brother.
Thanks, brother. So please, Michael, carry on.
It's an honor to join you guys, and thank you, Arief, for inviting me to join through this conversation. So I'm gonna sing Bob Marley song, Redemption song. Oh, pirate, yes, they're robber. So that's the merchant ships. Minutes of their day to come from the bottomless pit. But my hand was made strong by the hands of the Almighty. We forward in this generation triumphantly. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? That's all I ever had. Redemption song. Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our mind. Ooh, have no fear for atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Some say it's just a part of want you help sing these songs of freedom. It's all I ever had. Redemption song. Redemption song. Redemption song.
Bravo. Gosh, you're making me teary, brother. Okay, I'm going to give the last word to Kennedy, but before that, I just want to say thank you all for participating. Thank you all for staying on this Zoom call. It means a lot. Thank you to Eric. Thank you to Curtis, to Barbara, to Hadi, to Michael. Thank you, Kennedy and Globetrotter, for having this. That's my time. Thanks so much, you guys. Also, don't forget, there's going to be a feedback survey. Please fill it in. Muriel has put in the link. And maybe we do a group picture, but I'll let Kennedy handle that.
Okay. I just want to piggyback from Arief there. Thank you so much. Sorry, I'm gonna say hi to everyone. Hi. I don't know if you can see her. She's been knocking the door. We kind of locked her out a little bit. I just want to say thank you. This means a lot to me. I'm sure it means a lot to Michael. It means a lot to people who are just discriminated against. You know, it's a very personal thing. I got a taste of it just a couple of days ago. Yeah, Mama's in another room. Yeah, you want to go meet her over there? Yeah, sorry guys. So this is, I'm sure we could go longer. You know, I've heard some people text me that this can go, I know we just barely scratched the surface. You know, there's a lot there, it's very complex. When I explain to people that, oh, you know, it's complex and all that, a part of me just always says, it's just a basic human decency conversation, you know? It's not that hard, but again, if it's not something you deal with on a daily, you know, like everyone mentioned earlier, you know, just be aware of your surroundings, you know, read some books. The policy changes that Eric is talking about, and that's for the US, but globally, as Indonesians, you know, just being inclusive, you know, being aware, you know, and so it's not first of all, there are not a lot of Black people in Jakarta, but even there's the stereotype with Africans, and I see these at the airports when I, you know, when I go here. Luckily, I have an American passport, but you know, sometimes I'm always approached a certain way, you know, until they see my American passports, you know, then it's like, oh, okay, you know. But so it's basically a human decency conversation. You know, there'll be a laundry list of things to do. There are a lot of books to read now. I would share something in the chat group. Barbara has some amazing, I'd ask everyone to check out her work. She has a video that we're, I think, having, I don't know if we're going to have time to share, but if not, I will keep you guys posted on what she's working on. So just be self-aware. You know, it's a great time to be alive. You know, it's 2020, a lot of uncertainty, but also I feel like a lot of time for reflection. You know, there's almost like, it's a reflection time. I think we're all like looking into the mirror. You know, I think we're going to even approach how we move forward differently. We kind of have to, like, you know, life has been rattled, you know, in all kinds of ways. So I think this is just something we need to add to that list there of just, you know, how we are as human beings. You know, I really, really appreciate every one of you for taking the time. I know it's not easy. Some of you wake up late, Raya, you know, but she's here. You know, I appreciate that. And my folks in the US and Chicago, Eric is opening his store, a brand new redo after the Corona thing, a very big surprise for Chicago. The store has been in Chicago for close to 25 years. So it's a staple in Chicago, you know, so we're very excited. I'm sure he's busy planning all that, but he made some time to be here. Same with Barbara, Michael, I really appreciate you, Curtis as well. So you guys are real troopers. I appreciate it. I'm sure this will be one of many conversations, you know, and sometimes they will come in different formats, you know. Sometimes it's the dialogue, sometimes it's music, but it's just always good to learn and step away from your comfort zone and and just embrace things that are different, things that are other, I think that's something that I hold dear to me. I always love inclusivity. I love diversity in conversations. You just feel more equipped for the world, when you're having discussions and conversations with people that don't necessarily look like you, so you're making informed statements when you're talking and all that. So, we all have a lot to learn. None of us all have all the answers, but again, hopefully this was a first attempt and a decent first step, and there'll be many more. I see a lot of my Chicagoans in the house, Tony, Norman, Teague, a lot of my friends. So this is like from Chicago to Jakarta with love. Dakbo, my best friends are in the building, and it's late over there in Chicago, but they're tuned in. Dayo, and I really appreciate it. I also want to say a big thank you to, my team, my very small, lean team, Globetrotter, been working remotely. Ronnie, I see them in there. Ronnie, Nanda, Barry, everyone. This was tough, because I'm not going to lie, as a Black person here, I was still receiving all this information in real time. I didn't necessarily feel like talking about it, but of course I was talking about it with my wife and all that, but I had to just step into a place so I could kind of piece this together. And I'm glad, I'm very thankful, Arief, and everyone for kind of helping put this together. I know it's not easy. Everyone's schedule is tight. So Nadia, everyone, Ratna, Langston, a lot of you, everybody in there. I see my friends Kabir, everyone's in, Tanti, Tamara. I can't mention everyone, but everyone is there. Let me see if I can do that. Tanti, Maria, Rati, let's see, Gita, of course, Fajar. It's a big list. I can't call everyone's name. I want to say a big thank you to my wife. She gets me organized. You know what I mean? I'm the one that has the crazy ideas and thoughts, and she kind of, puts it in this nice little box for me. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not, I'm kind of the wild one, and she kind of like, okay, you haven't done the Excel sheets, I'm just like, oh, geez, so I'm sure you guys know how that goes, but I'm very grateful to everyone, and feel free to add any last words. I'm sure this would be one of many conversations, but I'm incredibly grateful, and hopefully we get to see the change that would be the change we want to see, basically. So thank you again. Anybody want to add anything?
Do we want a group picture?
Sure. I don't even know how you do that. How do you do that?
I don't know, Morel.
Is that a?
Oh, I think someone just needs to take it from their phone.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I don't think everyone can be on the frame, right?
We can take two pictures. Okay, let me take the picture. Everyone turn on their videos.
Yes, if you can. All right, see some people driving. Don't bash, man.
Oh, yeah. You don't have to participate if you're driving. Oh, great. Oh, really great to see these faces finally. Some I know, some, yeah.
The video was good.
Okay, we're gonna take it twice, yeah? So this is the first one for the first set of boxes. 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
Okay, and the other box. The other box doesn't have a lot of video, but I'll take it anyway.
Yes.
And some are from the first box, so you get your picture taken twice. 1, 2, 3. Fantastic, you guys. We're done.
Thank you so much, guys. What time is it? It's midnight in the US right now. Thank you so much. I think at first we thought this would be an hour conversation, but thank you so much. I appreciate it. All right. Salute, people.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.